Chapter 17. The Hidden Letter. The trick Mr. Gross had played on the Hollisters stunned them. Without a ladder, their escape from the cliff dwelling was cut off. For how long, none of them could guess. "We'll have to find some way out," Mr. Hollister said determinedly. "Perhaps if Pete stands on my shoulders, and Ricky gets up on his, we may be able to reach the top of the opening." "Okay, Dad, I think we can do it," Pete responded hopefully. He hopped onto his father's back and climbed to his sturdy shoulders. "Okay, Ricky, hop up." But the smaller boy was nowhere in sight. He had run off through the empty rooms of the ancient cliff dwelling. "Ricky, come back here," Mrs. Hollister shouted. When he did not answer, Pam begged to take his place. But Mrs. Hollister said she did not think it was exactly safe for any of the children to climb out. "Gross or Rattler may be waiting up there," she said. "They know now that their game is up and may try to harm us. Anyway, we should find Ricky." A search began, but when they did not find him, Mr. Hollister stepped out of one of the doorways to the terrace. At this moment, a pebble fell down in front of his face, and he looked up. There was Ricky, scaling the side of the cliff. "Ricky, be careful!" Mr. Hollister cried out. The boy stopped climbing for a moment and called back, "I'm all right. There are lots of rocks to hold on to. I have to get that bad man." Once more, he began making his way up the side of the cliff, grabbing out-jutting rocks and finding indentations for his feet. "That son of ours is a daredevil," Mr. Hollister told his wife as she, too, looked. "Well, if he can climb up there, so can I." "I can make it too, Dad," Pete said bravely. His father thought this over a minute, then said, "Pete, I believe you'd better stay here with the rest of our family and help protect the treasure." "All right, Dad." Mr. Hollister stood directly under Ricky and watched hawk-like in case he should have to catch him. But the boy was as sure-footed as a mountain goat and soon was at the top. He waved down to them. "Okay, I made it, Dad." His father waved back. "Fine, son. Wait for me, I'm coming up." Mr. Hollister removed his jacket and handed it to his wife. Getting a good hold on the face of the rocky cliff, he began to climb slowly. "Be careful," Sue called up to him. "I don't want to busted Daddy." This made Mr. Hollister laugh, so that for a second he lost his grip and began to slide backward. As his wife gasped, he grabbed a jutting rock and steadied himself. Then he began the perilous ascent again. Here and there he found toe-holds made by the ancient Indians. He could not climb as fast as Ricky had, but gradually Mr. Hollister pulled himself to the top and joined his son. He waited to catch his breath, then cupped his hands and shouted down, "We'll be back as soon as we can." After he and Ricky had left, Mrs. Hollister suggested that she and the other children go into the treasure room and find out what condition the stolen property was. Sue was so tired that her mother arranged a blanket for the drowsy child to lie on, and in no time the little girl was sound asleep. While Pete put new candles in the holders, Pam and Holly sat down on the floor and tried to fit the turquoise stones back into the bracelets. When the girls had reset the stones as best they could, they started to sort a pile of Yumatun dolls and children's costumes, which were piled up in a disorderly heap. "Let's take these things out into the daylight where we can examine them better," Pam suggested. Carrying one armful after another, the sisters lugged the articles through the inner room to the cave opening. In the bright sunlight, all the things appeared to be in good condition, in spite of the way they had been handled. As the girls smoothed out the wrinkled things and put them in orderly stacks, Pam picked up a piece of paper, which lay between a red shirt and a feathered headdress. "What's that?" Holly asked. "It looks like part of a letter," Pam replied, spreading the paper out flat with her fingers. "The writing on it's pretty faded," Holly observed. "It must be old. Can you read it, Pam?" At first her sister had trouble making out the scrawled letters, but presently she read slowly, heard this story from a dying Indian, claims he was the only survivor near the landslide, watched until the dust settled, made a map with new landmarks of the covered entrance to the turquoise mine, hid the map under the turquoise of his silver bracelet, had a leaf design. It was lost many years ago. That's why the bracelets were taken apart to find the map, Pam exclaimed. I wonder where Mr. Gross got this letter. Let's tell Mother and Pete about it, Holly urged, and the two girls dashed back. Pam reread the letter, and the others became very excited. But a moment later, Pete said, worried, Do you think Mr. Gross found the map? He probably did, Pam sighed. And right in my bracelet or Holly's. Maybe not, her mother said encouragingly. If he had, I doubt that he would have come here. That's right, said Pete. He would have been off hunting for the turquoise mine. While Holly was listening, she idly lifted a small rug loom used by Indian children. Beneath it was an ornate box painted in bright colors. This looks like a jewel box, she thought. The little girl had some trouble opening the tight latch, but when the top flew up, she gasped in surprise. It's full of jewelry, she exclaimed, lifting out a handful of turquoise pins and earrings. And there are 2 bracelets at the bottom, Pam cried, looking inside. She picked them up. One had a leaf design, worked into the silver, and held a beautiful turquoise stone. Maybe this is the secret bracelet, Holly said. Let me look under the stone. Pam handed it to her, and she tried to pry the turquoise up with her fingernail. Oh, it's in tight, she said. Pete, will you lend me your knife, please? Sure. Pete flipped open the blade and handed the knife to her. Be careful, her mother warned. Don't break it. Holly gingerly dug around the edge of the stone for a few moments, when flip, the turquoise popped out. The gasp that Holly gave woke Sue up. Look, Holly exclaimed. There's a tiny paper in here. The others looked on astounded as the little girl opened a tiny yellowed sheet. What funny markings, Pete said. Maybe it's the map to the lost turquoise mine. Holly asked her mother gleefully what she thought. It could be, Mrs. Hollister replied enthusiastically. If this mark is Pilar Punta, then the arrow from it leads past the 2 X's, which could be the twin caves. And the next arrow points to that circle, Pam added. Oh, I'm sure it's the lost mine. I hope Daddy hurries back so we can get out of here and start hunting, said Holly eagerly. But if the Indians don't know where Pilar Punta is, how do we find it? Pete asked as he put the map into his pocket. We'll keep trying anyhow, Pam said, with determination. Mother, wasn't the landslide somewhere on the opposite side of this canyon? Yes, dear, in that general direction. Then maybe if we get a good look at the places over there from real high up, we might see Pilar Punta. You mean from a plane? Pete asked. No, I mean from the tower. Let's see if we can get into it. She started off, with Pete and Holly close on her heels. They raced along the terrace until they came to the tower. There ought to be an entrance someplace, Pete mused. If so, it had long ago been blocked off. But each of the children began pulling at the earth and stones. Suddenly one came loose. Then several tumbled down. Through the opening they could see a spiraling stone stairway built into the wall all the way to the top. The children scrambled up it and peered out 2 openings which overlooked the canyon. This must have been the old lookout, Pete remarked. I suppose an Indian was stationed here at all times to watch for approaching enemies. How high we are, Holly exclaimed, looking across to the opposite side of the canyon with its lovely rainbow coloring. A white cloud hugged the mountaintop. Look, what's that sticking up into the cloud? The girl asked. Pam glued her eyes to the distant object. It's a peak of some kind, she said, studying a small spire that pointed like a giant needle against the white fluff. Do you suppose that's Pilar Punta? Holly asked. The idea sent a chill of excitement racing down the spines of the three children. It does look like a pillar, Pete shouted. Oh, Holly, if you've discovered it, then with the map we can solve the mystery. He and the girls climbed down the steps and hurried to report what they had seen. Mrs. Hollister smiled, and Sue clapped her hands gleefully. When Ricky and Daddy get back, she said, we can drive out and find the turquoise mountain. As the minutes ticked by, they wondered what was keeping the others. They've been gone more than 2 hours, Mrs. Hollister said, a frown of worry crossing her face. Another 20 minutes, all of them became alarmed. Mother, do you suppose, Pam began, then stopped. But to herself she said anxiously, Oh, I hope no harm has come to Dad and Ricky.